Hi, it's Barbara Gabogrecan, and we're now up to stage 2 of the large painting that I'm doing for Blamey and Saunders hearing. Remember, this is going on a beautiful heritage listed building, and we're now looking at how to prepare the silk for painting. Hi, it's Barbara Gabogrecan, and we're looking at the second stage of the development of the large wall hanging that I'm producing for Blamey and Saunders hearing. They have a beautifully restored heritage listed building in East Melbourne and want a major piece for their waiting room. You saw earlier the drawing that I had done. Now I have to get this drawing onto the silk. What we're doing here is putting little clips to hold the silk in place on the drawing, and I have to sort of trace it. Unfortunately, the silk and drawing's larger than the table that I have, so I've used a clip, you can see a large one bottom left there, to hold it in place on the edge of the table. Now I use a 6B pencil because it's a very soft lead, and even though it has to be sharpened, it's not to be sharp, because if it had a sharp point on it, it could cut the silk. Most people, depending on whether they're left or right-handed, will find that it's easier to use the pencil going one direction rather than another, and that's why you'll see the little shorter strokes I make rather than one big one. Also, my other hand has to keep the silk firm and in place on the drawing. Even though the silk's clipped on, it will move, so you have to sort of be aware of what parts of the drawing you've done and make sure that they're fitting the actual original underneath that you're tracing from. It's quite interesting to do this because it's very difficult to see when you're doing it if you've actually covered all the pieces. It's actually easier to see it on this video than it is in reality, because it is quite dark underneath and your pencil lead is similar tone, and therefore sometimes you think, have I actually done that piece, or am I just seeing the original underneath? I'm doing some rather intricate smaller pieces here, and again you will notice that I'm using the pencil in one direction more than the other. It just makes it that much easier for me. When I get to a certain area on the drawings, I like to check to see if I am actually covering it all. I just lift the silk and I can see then the drawing on the surface of the silk as differing from the drawing I'm tracing underneath. And I see a little bit there that I missed. Then you have to take care to flatten your silk again. Now you have to stretch your silk so it's nice and tight for you to begin the painting process. Now you'll see here a little brass rod with very sharp little brass picots in it, and this is what I use. There are different things that you can use, but most of what I use is French, both the dies and the equipment, and I find it just gives a better result. You can get a much tighter stretch on the silk by using these picots. So once you get your silk sort of positioned, you've got to stretch it. Now I've got it already pinned on the opposite side, so this side is a little bit more difficult because it's fairly tight. It wants to jump out of my hand, so to speak, and as I stretch it over, I just use my fingernail to push it down over the edge of the sharp point. If you don't have fingernails and you prick your finger, you'll bleed, but don't bleed on the silk, please. And you could use just the wooden end of the pencil to push it down if you wanted to. Right, so once it's in position, the next thing I have to do is prepare the gutter. Now you'll see here that I use a little bottle, and it's got a nib on it. The nib is like a needle, if you like, and I have a little fine piece of wire that sits in the needle hole, and that helps to stop air getting in to the gutter, because air will dry the gutter out and make it too thick to use. So once you make sure you've got your little tube, it's a plastic tube, remember, with a little metal top on it, you can then fill it, and I use a larger container of gutter. So I take the top off this bottle first. It's a little bit tight because the gutter sometimes sticks underneath it. And I take the bigger bottle of gutter and just carefully pour from the bigger bottle into the smaller bottle. You've got to make sure that bigger bottle doesn't get air into it for any longer than absolutely necessary. So the lid goes on tightly immediately I've finished, and on goes the top. And you can see the little bit of wire sticking out there. Now, when I go to draw, I make sure that I use a tissue, and I just press the bottle and make sure that the gutter is flowing from the little needle point. Once I know that's happening, I just wipe the point and I start redrawing over the pencil lines that I had already put on the silk. This gutter is a sort of liquid rubber, and it penetrates the silk entirely, so that when you go to paint with the dye, it will stay within that silk. You'll notice a bit there, I got an air bubble, and as I was drawing it left a gap and it didn't actually do it. You must make sure that every single part that should be drawn is drawn, even if you have to go back over a spot of it, which you'd have to do occasionally. Depending on the strength of the silk, whether it's a very heavy silk or a light silk, the gutter will respond slightly differently. So on this silk, which is a heavy silk, I'm noticing that it actually bleeds out a little bit, but it also dries very quickly. Whereas if I'm using a thinner silk like a page or a pongee, it can sort of stay sticky, and I've got to use a heater to dry it. I'm just putting a piece of foam there over the picot so that I can rest my hand on it a little bit when I'm working on a part of the design that's close to the actual edge of the picots. These little pointed picots really do hurt and really can make you bleed if they prick onto your finger or arm. So that's just a protection. And I'm just building up the gutter area, drawing over the pencil drawing. And then that little hesitation there, I was actually wiping the nib because it actually got a little bit of fluff off the silk on it. So even though I'm pressing fairly carefully, you're still actually breaking into the silk a little bit. You'll notice the silk is actually moving slightly, even though it's stretched. It's only stretched on two sides, and so it will move on you, and this makes the drawing a little bit difficult to do as well. I think the hardest part of silk painting is drawing with gutter. You've got to have just the right pressure on your little pot. You've got to keep a pressure going to make the to make the gutter keep flowing. Now, as an artist, I also sign my work, and even though the camera's looking at this upside down, you'll see that you can actually, if you go slowly and carefully and your size is right, you can actually write fairly fluently. So if you were doing a job for a company, for instance, you could put their logo, not the drawing perhaps, but at least the name of the company on it, to help you sell your work. So we're just doing another little piece here of a bud of the flower. This flower is actually a native hibiscus that I'm drawing. I tend to use Australiana, both fauna and flora. Now we're just taking a longer look at what I've done so far, just so that you can start to see how it's progressing. You can see there's a patch there in the middle I haven't done at all as yet. And when we look up this end, you'll notice now that my signature Gabogrecan is easy enough to read. And that will be hidden in amongst the design when the colour etc. goes in. And that's it.